Right now, you're looking at glass, not just your screen, the camera lens that filmed this, the window light in your room, the glasses on your face, maybe. Glass is the most important material you never think about, and you've been staring straight through it or at it your whole life. So, where did it come from? Sure, a craftsman's kiln in ancient Mesopotamia, 5,500 years ago. The fire had been burning all night, hotter than anyone intended, and when the flames died down, the workers come to clear the ash, and they find something underneath, something smooth, something that catches the light, something that has never existed on this earth before. Did it really happen that way? Nobody knows. Nobody recorded the moment, and historians still debate exactly when and how the first glass was made. But somewhere in those workshops, by accident, by experiment, or both, humans created a material that would eventually change what it meant to be human. The material was once worth more than gold. A Roman emperor had a man executed, not for making it badly, but for making it too perfectly. And for 300 years, the only craftsman in the world who knew its secrets lived under constant threat of assassination. I'm Aiden Thomas of Hidden History, and this is the story of how humanity started to see clearly. This is the history of glass. The earliest glass we've ever found dates to around 3500 BC, Mesopotamia, modern-day Iraq and Syria. And the leading theory is that it wasn't invented so much as discovered. The same intense heat that potters were using to fire clay and glazed ceramics was also fusing silica and the surrounding sand into something new, a crude, impure, partially transparent substance appearing on the surfaces of vessels, almost as a side effect. The craftsmen didn't understand the chemistry. They just knew they had never seen anything like it. For centuries, this glassy material wasn't molded. It wasn't shaped into bottles or windows. It was used as a coating, a glaze applied to stone beads, figurines, and decorative tiles. Rare, precious, difficult to reproduce. The first actual hollow glass vessels, objects you could hold and fill, appear around 1500 BC. And at that moment, two civilizations immediately recognized what glass would become. One of them was Egypt. And what they did with it changes the story entirely. In ancient Egypt, glass was not a building material, not a window, not something you drank from casually. It was a gemstone. The Egyptians valued glass with the same reverence they gave to lapis lazuli, turquoise, and gold. It appeared in the tombs of the pharaohs. Deep inside Tutankhamun's tomb, in the treasury room beyond the burial chamber, Howard Carter opened a chest and found a gold pectoral, an ornament made to be worn over the heart, inlaid with a pale yellow-green scarab at its center. For decades, Egyptologists assumed it was a carved stone, something polished and precious. It wasn't. It was glass. Specifically, natural glass formed roughly 29 million years ago when a meteorite impact or comet airburst superheated the Saharan sand into a field of pale glass, stretching across the Libyan desert. Tutankhamun was buried with a piece of the sky in his treasure chest. But Egyptian craftsmen weren't waiting around for meteors. By 1500 BC, they had developed a technique called core forming, winding threads of molten glass around a clay and dung core, then scraping the core out once the glass cooled. Each piece took days. Each piece was extraordinarily expensive. How expensive? When a Bronze Age trading ship sank off the coast of modern Turkey around 1300 BC, the famous Ulubu wreck, divers found 175 ingots of raw colored glass in its cargo hold, shipped like bullion, alongside copper, tin, and gold. The stuff you toss in the recycling bin once crossed the Mediterranean as treasure. Every piece was opaque, deliberately colored, copper for blue, manganese for purple, antimony for white. The Egyptians didn't want transparent glass, they wanted color, status, something that looked like a gemstone. The idea of glass as a material you could see through, a window onto the world, was still 15 centuries away. For 3,000 years, that's all glass was: slow, costly, and rare. Then a single breath changed everything. Around 50 BC, somewhere along the eastern Mediterranean coast, most likely modern-day Syria or Lebanon, an anonymous craftsman picked up a small gather of molten glass on the end of an iron tube and did something that had never been done before. He blew air through it. The glass expanded, became a bubble, and if you kept working it, rolling it, blowing again, shaping it with wooden tools while it was still hot, you could create a hollow vessel in minutes rather than days. Glass blowing, the single most significant technological revolution in the history of the material. And we have no idea who invented it. No name, no record, just the technique itself, spreading across the ancient world with extraordinary speed. Within 50 years, glass blowing had changed everything. Workshops multiplied across the Mediterranean, production scaled, prices collapsed. For the first time in history, ordinary people, not just pharaohs and emperors, could own glass. And that sudden democratization caught the attention of the world's most powerful empire. The Romans became obsessed with glass in a way no civilization had been before. By the 1st century, Rome had window glass, crude and greenish, but functional. And for the first time in history, that created something that sounds mundane until you realize nobody ever had it before. Light without cold. Before glass windows, every home faced the same brutal trade-off. Open your shutters and you had light, and wind, and rain, and freezing air. Close them and you had warmth and darkness. Glass ended that choice. Wealthy Roman villas were fitted with panes that held the light and blocked the weather simultaneously. Pliny the Elder documented glass factories operating in Rome, in Campania, and other provinces. Roman glass has been found as far north as Scotland. But most Romans, the vast majority, still lived with wooden shutters and oiled cloth stretched across window openings. Glass windows were a luxury, a status symbol, the thing that said, without word, that you could afford to live differently from everyone else. And then Rome produced one of the most disturbing glass stories in history. Pliny includes an account in his Natural History. He flags it as a rumor, but thinks it's worth recording. From the reign of Emperor Tiberius in the early 1st century, an inventor came to the imperial court. He brought with him a glass flask, and then in front of the emperor, he dropped it on the stone floor. It didn't shatter. The glass had somehow been made flexible, durable enough to survive the fall with only a slight dent. The inventor produced a small hammer, tapped the dent back into shape, and presented the flask. Perfect again. You'd think he'd have been celebrated, rewarded with a commission, given the recognition of having solved something no one had solved in 3,000 years. He wasn't. Tiberius had him executed. Because, according to the account, the emperor feared that if unbreakable glass became widely known, it would collapse the value of metals across the empire. An economy-disrupting invention suppressed on the spot. The craftsman's name was never recorded. His technique was never recovered. One of the most significant material innovations in ancient history erased because one emperor was afraid of what it would do to the markets. Historians debate whether the story is literally true, but Pliny thought it was worth putting in the record, and the reason it feels plausible is that it fits a pattern we'll see again. Every time glass became powerful enough to matter, someone with power moved to control it. When the Western Roman Empire fell in 476, European glassmaking collapsed with it. Trade networks vanished, workshops closed. The specialized knowledge that Roman craftsmen had accumulated, their formulas, their firing techniques, their understanding of composition, scattered, degraded, and in many places disappeared entirely. For several centuries, window glass was essentially unavailable in Western Europe. Most homes had never had it to begin with. People went back to wooden shutters and darkness. Glass survived only in the wealthiest monasteries, imported at extraordinary cost from the eastern Mediterranean. While Western Europe forgot how to make glass, an entire civilization was quietly advancing the art. And when European glassmaking finally revived, it didn't revive on its own. Between the 8th and 13th centuries, the Islamic world was producing glasswork of a sophistication that had no equivalent anywhere on earth. In Damascus, in Cairo, in Persia, craftsmen and scholars were developing techniques that Roman workshops had never mastered. Intricate enameling on glass surfaces, surface gilding, precision cutting. The mosques and courts of the Islamic world were filled with glass of extraordinary beauty. Damascus became a global center, producing vessels painted with figures and calligraphy and colored enamel fused permanently into the surface of the glass. These techniques traveled through trade routes connecting the Islamic world to sub-Saharan Africa, to China, to the edges of Europe. And when European glassmaking began its revival in the 11th and 12th centuries, it was the result of contact through trade, through the Crusades, with techniques that Islamic craftsmen had kept alive and advanced for 5 centuries. The Crusades brought glass back to Europe, which means the filtered light in a medieval European cathedral, that famous glow through stained glass, has a story that runs through Damascus before it reaches Chartreux. That part tends to get left out. When glass finally returned to Europe, it didn't go into homes, it went into churches, and it didn't become a window you looked through, it became a window you read. In the great Gothic cathedrals of 12th and 13th century Europe, Chartres, Notre Dame, Sainte-Chapelle, master craftsmen fused powdered metal oxides into molten glass to create colors of staggering intensity. Cobalt for blue, gold chloride for deep red. The individual pieces were cut and held together with strips of lead called kilns, assembled into images that covered entire walls. The reason wasn't decoration, it was instruction. In a world where the vast majority of people could not read, stained glass was the Bible. Birth, death, resurrection, miracle, all of it rendered in light on a scale that left nothing to the imagination. Abbot Sugar of St. Denis, one of the architects of Gothic stained glass, wrote that light streaming through colored glass was a form of divine experience. He called it lux nova, new light, light that lifted the soul toward God. The same material that had been a gemstone in an Egyptian tomb and a death sentence in a Roman court was now teaching the stories a civilization was built on, to people who could never afford to own a single piece of it. And glass still hadn't made it into their homes. By the 13th century, Venice had become the glass capital of the Western world. The city had built on what Islamic craftsmen had preserved, and developed techniques that produced glass of a clarity and quality no one else could match. In 1291, the Republic of Venice issued a decree. All glass-making furnaces in the city were to be relocated to the island of Murano, approximately a mile offshore. The stated reason was fire safety. The furnaces genuinely were a risk in a city built on wooden foundation, but the arrangement had a convenient side effect. On an island, secrets are easier to guard. The Venetian state gave Murano's glassmakers extraordinary privileges: the right to marry into Venetian nobility, their own court of law, their own governance. But the price of those privileges was absolute secrecy. A craftsman who shared techniques with a foreign power could be charged with treason. His family could be imprisoned. And if a glassmaker fled Venice for another country, according to Venetian lore, the Republic sent agents after him to negotiate his return if possible, to eliminate if not. For over 300 years, this is how Venetian glass stayed Venetian, until France ran one of the history's great industrial espionage operations to break the monopoly. We told that full story, the smuggled craftsman, the suspicious deaths in Paris, and the Hall of Mirrors in our History of the Mirror episode. Link below. Because the real treasure Venice was guarding wasn't mirrors at all. It was something that happened inside those watched, controlled workshops in the 1450s. In the 1440s and 1450s, a glassmaker named Angelo Barovier achieved what 3,000 years of glassmaking had never managed: perfectly clear, colorless glass. He called it cristallo, crystal. The technique was precise. Adding manganese dioxide to the molten glass neutralized the iron impurities in silica and had always given glass a greenish or yellowish cast. For the first time in history, you could look through glass and see the world without distortion, without color, clearly. Angelo Barovier died in 1460. He never left Venice. He never received recognition outside the tight world of Murano craftsmen. Most people who hold a glass today have never heard his name. But Cristallo broke the monopoly that had been held for centuries. The technique spread. And once they did, glass began doing something it had never quite managed in 5,000 years of history. It started coming home. By the 17th century, glass windows had finally moved from the villas of Roman emperors to the homes of the European middle class. Not the poor, not yet, but craftsmen, merchants, and minor nobility were fitting their homes with glass panes for the first time in history. Light became a domestic feature rather than a civic monument, and the moment glass windows became common enough to count, governments found a way to tax them. In 1696, England introduced the window tax. The logic was simple and deeply cynical. The more windows a house had, the wealthier its owner. Tax the windows, and you tax the wealthy without having to intrude inside the home. Tax collectors could do their job by counting panes from the street. What happened next was entirely predictable. Homeowners began breaking up their windows to reduce their tax bill. Windows that had finally brought light into ordinary homes were sealed shut again, not by poverty, not by winter, but by a line in a tax ledger. If you walk through old British towns today, you'll see window-shaped recesses filled with brick on Georgian-era buildings. That's not a design choice. That's tax avoidance preserved in masonry. The window tax ran for 156 years, finally repealed in 1851, after reformers successfully argued that blocking light from homes was a public health catastrophe. Darkness and poor ventilation were contributing directly to the disease epidemics tearing through Victorian slums. A tax on light, repealed because the darkness was killing people. The 20th century transformed glass from a craft into a commodity. In the 1950s, a British engineer named Alistair Pilkington developed the float glass process, pouring molten glass onto a bed of molten tin, where it spread perfectly flat under its own weight. No grinding, no polishing. Before Pilkington, truly flat glass was one of the hardest things in the world to make consistently. After him, it was one of the cheapest. Every window in your home today almost certainly came from the descendant of that process, and every mirrored skyscraper on every city's skyline is float glass, stacked 50 stories high. Then, in 2006, a single phone call changed the story one more time. Steve Jobs was designing the first iPhone. He wanted a glass screen, not plastic, which scratched too easily. But he needed something extraordinarily thin, extraordinarily hard, and available in 6 months. He called Corning, an American glass manufacturer, and Corning told him about a process that engineers had developed in the early 1960s. An experimental ion exchange technique that replaced sodium ions in the glass surface with larger potassium ions. Creating a surface under such intense compression was nearly impossible to crack. They had it developed, tested it, and then shelved it for 4 decades because no one had a use for it. Jobs said, "Make it." 6 months later, the first iPhone shipped with the Gorilla Glass on its screen. Today, Gorilla Glass is on billions of devices. The average person touches their phone screen more than 2,000 times a day. The glass your fingertip is resting on right now is a direct descendant of an anonymous Syrian craftsman's blowpipe. Angelo Barovier's crucible, in a laboratory experiment that sat on a shelf for 40 years, waiting for the right question. It wasn't that glass made the world more beautiful, it was that glass made the world visible. I hope you enjoyed today's episode of Hidden History. If so, hit that subscribe button, like the video, give us a hype, subscribe to our email, and comment below on another episode you'd like to see. Next week, we're continuing our trilogy on glass, this time on helping people see better, including yours truly. Next week, we're covering the hidden history of spectacles. Now, take a look around. History is everywhere.